Turn the lights back on. Wow. Retro electro tech. When real audio ruled the world.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen of Vintage Audio Persuasion. I'm Retro Ernest of Retro Electro Tech, and I have on the bench a disassembled Siel Cruise monophonic polyphonic synthesizer from about 1980. So I've had this in the shop for quite a while due to a super heavy workload, and I'm now getting into the troubleshooting and servicing of this collectible unit. During the initial evaluation, I noted a problem with signal loss involving the mono volume control and a dead A sharp note. So let me start with the dead note. You'll notice there are two contact boards, one for mono operation and one for poly. As such, we'll ignore the electronic componentry for a moment and focus in part on the typical reason for dead or intermittent notes, and quite simply, it's often on account of contact issues. So we always want to evaluate the contact surfaces to include, in this case, the individual contact springs that you see here and the bus rods, okay? You can see both the springs and the rods are quite tarnished. If you look over here, you can see how dark, I think you can anyways, how dark this section of the bus rod is compared to over here. Now I polished this section a little bit just using a swab and some 99% anhydrous alcohol. There's other things you can use. You can even use Tarnex as long as you really clean all that Tarnex off the surfaces that you apply it to. But there's different things you can use as a point. Okay, I'm just using some anhydrous alcohol and it's working just fine. So yeah, you can see how much tarnish I removed just from that little section there. And it's the same, you know, across the board as far as the contact springs and the bus rods are concerned. You know, on both the mono and poly board, it's the same. And as a matter of course, I'll be going through and cleaning these surfaces. However, the tarnished surfaces are not causing the dead A sharp note, believe it or not. Okay, so let us take a look at the schematic, and I'm going to point out where the problem exists. So considering that I was dealing with one dead note and the associated contacts weren't the issue, I wanted to kind of, you know, break down the circuit a little bit, and it's the same for all notes, what you see here. So from our contact, we see, you know, the associated components that make up this portion of the circuit of interest, and I wanted to kind of suss out along the path what was causing that problem, of course, whether or not we were dealing with some you know, bad resistors, open resistors, a bad cap, diode, whatever the case, as you see here. So essentially, I wanted to see if there was an interruption to start with between the contact and this IC over here, which is a TDA 1008, I believe. Serves as a frequency divider. So let me actually move over to the board and translate what we're looking at here to the you know, the physical board, the physical world. And I will just point out real quick on here where the problem was. So let me, okay, right here, because I have to kind of look at the back of the camera and make sure everything looks okay. So right in here is where we had a problem, okay? We had a break. So let me show you on the board. So on the schematic, I pointed out the break between this 1.5K resistor here and the positive lead of this 4.7 mic cap, okay? So you'll notice here, and I'm just using a DMM on continuity mode, and you notice we have no continuity because there's a break between here. Whereas let's jump over across to the neighboring note, and same resistor, same cap, and we have, and that's exactly what we should have, continuity, okay? So no rocket science there. It essentially came down to continuity testing to find that issue, and of course, if I would have had to keep moving through the signal path, I would have performed the appropriate tests on the, you know, various components along that path. So, you know, of course, if I suspected one or more were bad. So anyways, let me actually move to the other side of the board. Okay, and here we are around the back, of course, and here is where our brake is located. So I'm just going to get a piece of copper foil tape and lay it in here carefully and neatly and get it all soldered in place and just kind of bridge the gap here. And after I get that repair done, then I'm going to be back because I have some other things I have to point out, and I'll go into a little bit more detail as to what else needs to be done to the synth. Be right back. Okay, so here we are. Nothing fancy, just a quick repair. A piece of copper foil tape. I used the appropriate 2-part epoxy to adhere it to the board, tacked it in, and then put some coating over the repair itself, just to keep the the copper foil tape from oxidizing or anything like that. So although it's quick and not fancy schmancy, it is a durable repair and it will hold up just fine. So I just wanted to point that out. Okay, so I don't have the mono board back in, but I laid the poly board in place. Let me demonstrate the repair. There's our A sharp. So there we go. I'm just going to do a little bit more cleaning of contacts, and I will be right back and we'll touch on the other issue I mentioned a moment ago. Okay, so here we are. Board's all back together. One thing that I want to mention before I forget is you'll notice throughout this unit there's all these ribbon cables and connectors. When you have the connectors off, that's the time to use some contact cleaner and clean the pins and sockets before reconnecting everything. So also too, and let me zoom in, and in reinstalling these boards, the mono board and the poly board directly behind it, it's done via these black brackets here, okay? And the poly board has its own set of brackets. You can see too that these brackets are stacked. You notice the brackets of the mono board here in front are stacked with the brackets to the rear there on the poly board. So the poly board's brackets connect the poly board to the underside of the key bed directly, and then the brackets here on the mono board interconnect with those brackets. Again, you can see that they are stacked. And you notice too that the brackets have these little channels here on top that support the bus rods. So it's a fairly straightforward, clever system of doing things. Probably the biggest challenge is lining up these spring contacts here with these holes, okay? So you'll see that each key has 2 contacts threading up through the holes there, okay? You have the mono contact here at the front and then the poly contact to the rear, okay? So when you're lining up the boards and reinstalling them, you have to go through that little song and dance of getting everything lined up. And you know, for the most part, if you line them up pretty good and raise the board up into position, a lot of these contacts will fall into the holes pretty good. Okay, but a lot of them will not. So you have to use like a pair of forceps. I have a pair of forceps I use, a smaller pair, or you can use a small pair of needle nose pliers, or even a pair of tweezers that is, good enough, that are good enough to grip these little spring contacts. And then all you'll do is just kind of gently bend them and guide them up into the holes. So, as I often say, it's not rocket science, but you do have to go through that little song and dance and get everything lined up. Otherwise, I just wanted to mention that, so let's go ahead and move on. Okay, and the last problem that I want to point out, and I'm going to keep this fairly brief because in the interest of time, as I always say, but also too, there's going to be some things I just do off camera because I need to whiz through this equipment and get this done. So the problem that we were having also, in addition to the one that I just covered earlier, was when I would select mono here and work the mono volume, I was experiencing signal loss. The signal was very intermittent. I had to really press down and manipulate and wiggle around the VR, the slider, and it seemed like when I would have it in just that little sweet spot that I was reestablishing signal. But what it turns out is, once I started cracking into things and going through and sussing out problems, I realized that it was the connectivity on the underside of the board involving probably solder joints. Now, I haven't pulled this board off yet, obviously, and performed an inspection and under magnification and all that, like I'm going to do in a moment. But let me just go ahead and demonstrate. So you can see that I have nothing. However, when I get my magic pointer and sandwich it between these connectors and just kind of give it a little fulcrum kind of effect here and kind of bend these connectors just a little bit. Okay, so you can see there's a connection issue right in this area here, and probably when I examine the pins and the solder joints, I'm going to find that I need to reflow all of that area. So that's what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to go through and inspect or otherwise examine these boards. They need to come off anyways because I'm going to perform a really in-depth cleaning of all these switches and VRs or sliders, whatever. Flush them and relubricate them, and again check all of these connectors. There's a lot of this ribbon and all of these connectors. I want to just go through and check everything, clean all these pins and sockets, and just that kind of stuff. So like I always say, a lot of times it's just problems with connectivity, connectors and cables and solder joints and all that. You really have to go through and check for that. And a lot of times if you just take a non-conductive pointer and just carefully flex boards and just kind of flex the connectors and all that, you'll find that sometimes signal just comes back. And I suspected that probably was going to be the case, even with that VR there. I thought, well, maybe the VR could be bad, yes, but also too, it could just very well be the solder joints underneath the VR. And when I saw all these cables here, I figured, well, check those as well, because oftentimes, again, that's the problem. So the only other thing I'm going to do besides going through and again working on connections and solder joints and reflowing this and reflowing that is I am going to I'm going to recap the power supply board here, go through and really check all of the component values and so forth, make sure everything is within spec. Like I always say, the heart of the unit is the power supply. With a bad heart, that's not a good thing. And of course, I don't have the time or the budget to go through and do a full bore restoration on this synth. Even though it is a collectible synth, it is a nice synth, but that's not what I'm going to be doing with this unit here. So I'm at least going to concentrate my effort and the customer's funds on, the part of the unit that undergoes the most wear and tear, electrically speaking, as I often say, and make sure that we have a good heart. And again, recap and check all of the component tolerances and so forth and so on while I'm performing an inspection on everything else, and while I'm going through and reflowing suspect solder joints, getting all these connections cleaned up and all that. So anyways, I'm going to move on now and just end it here. And like I always say, peace, love, music, and the vintage audio that brings it to your ears. Till next time.
This is a poor man's shoe production.